NBC News exclusive on the beef between the Supreme Court and some federal judges. In very rare interviews, 10 of them tell our Lawrence Hurley they're frustrated with the Supreme Court for overturning rulings that went against the White House with little or no explanation. One judge even alleging that the Supreme Court, which of course includes 3 Trump nominees, is throwing them under the bus. Another says the high court is trying to make it look like the lower courts are biased against the president, telling us it is inexcusable. They don't have our backs. And the big picture here, the Supreme Court has granted the Trump administration requests to block lower court rulings in more than 70% of its emergency cases brought by the administration. NBC News has reached out to Chief Justice John Roberts, who declined to comment. Lawrence is joining us now. And let's just say, we don't often hear from, literally 2 handfuls, almost a dozen federal judges in one place. Talk to us about this. What did they tell you? How did you even start some of these discussions with these judges?
Well, I think, first of all, it's an unusual...
Okay, so this is huge, and it's showing that Trump's second-term agenda is running into the same brick wall that stopped him in his first term. Federal courts. On December 9th, 2025, a federal judge in New Hampshire issued a nationwide injunction blocking one of Trump's signature executive orders. This wasn't some minor policy tweak. This was Trump's attempt to end birthright citizenship for children born in the United States to undocumented immigrants. Trump has been talking about this for years. He promised during the campaign that he would end birthright citizenship on day one. He signed an executive order trying to do exactly that, and a federal judge just said no. Not just no for New Hampshire, no for the entire country. A nationwide block that prevents Trump from implementing this policy anywhere in the United States. And Trump is absolutely losing his mind over it. But before we go any further, real quick, let's be honest, you can't really trust mainstream media anymore. That's why we built Pump Politics, to bring you real stories, real context, and no corporate spin. If you want to stay ahead of the headlines, join our free newsletter. We'll send the news straight to your inbox every day. Just click the link in the description to join. And if you just want to support what we're doing, join us. Be part of the community that actually cares about the truth. All right, let's get back to the video.
Right. These judges are getting a lot of personal threats because of the rulings against the Trump administration. There's very harsh criticism of their rulings coming from the president himself, but also his allies on social media and so on. And so they're operating under a lot of pressure, and I think that has changed the mood a little bit within the judiciary. I think maybe they're a little more open to speaking out. And so that's what happened here. One of the judges even said, somebody's going to get killed, because that's how concerned they are. They're concerned about answering the door when someone knocks on the door, all these kind of things. So, and there's been an evidence of a rise in threats against judges, and they're concerned that the Supreme Court's actions are kind of serving to kind of validate these concerns or the criticisms, because...
So let's talk about what this executive order actually did. Trump's order targeted what he calls anchor babies. That's his term for children born in the U.S. to parents who are undocumented immigrants. Under current law, which has been in place since the 14th Amendment was ratified in 1868, anyone born on U.S. soil is automatically a U.S. citizen. That's birthright citizenship. It's been the law for over 150 years. But Trump has always argued that this is being abused, that people come to the U.S. illegally, have children here, and those children become automatic citizens who then anchor the family in the country. And Trump wanted to end that. His executive order attempted to deny citizenship to children born in the U.S. if their parents don't have legal status, just like that. With the stroke of a pen, Trump tried to overturn 150 years of constitutional law, and the ACLU immediately sued. They filed a challenge arguing that Trump's executive order is blatantly unconstitutional. The 14th Amendment is crystal clear. It says all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States. That's not ambiguous. That's not open to interpretation through executive order. That's constitutional text. And the judge agreed. On December 9th, the New Hampshire federal judge certified a nationwide class action on behalf of all children who would be affected by Trump's order. And then the judge issued a preliminary injunction blocking the order from being enforced anywhere in the country. That means Trump's policy is dead in the water. At least for now. He can't implement it. He can't deny citizenship to any babies born on U.S. soil. The injunction stops everything. Trump's reaction was predictable but still remarkable in its disregard for judicial authority. He immediately went to Truth Social and blasted the decision as judicial overreach. He called the judge an activist. He said this is a blatant violation of the Constitution, which is rich because Trump is the one trying to violate the Constitution by ignoring the 14th Amendment. And Trump vowed to appeal to the Supreme Court. He's betting that the conservative supermajority he created will side with him and overturn this injunction, and maybe they will. The Supreme Court has been friendly to Trump on some issues, but birthright citizenship is so foundational, so clearly established in the Constitution, that even conservative justices might balk at overturning it. And this isn't the only executive order getting blocked. Trump has signed dozens of executive orders since taking office, and courts across the country are issuing temporary restraining orders and preliminary injunctions left and right. There's a tracker maintained by Just Security that shows over 30 lawsuits challenging Trump's executive orders on everything from anti-union measures to immigration enforcement to administrative changes, and judges are blocking many of these orders. Trump is facing the same problem he faced in his first term. He tries to govern by executive order. He bypasses Congress. He ignores constitutional limits. And courts step in and say, you can't do that. That's not how the system works. But Trump refuses to learn this lesson. He keeps pushing the boundaries. He keeps signing orders that are legally dubious at best and unconstitutional at worst. And he keeps losing in court. And every time he loses, it undermines his authority. It makes him look weak. It shows his base that he can't actually deliver on his promises because the courts keep stopping him. And that's politically damaging because Trump's whole brand is about winning, about being strong, about getting things done that other presidents couldn't. But when a federal judge in New Hampshire can block his signature immigration policy with a single ruling, that makes Trump look powerless. It makes him look like he doesn't understand how government works. And that's a huge problem for him heading into the midterms. So that's where we are. Trump tried to end birthright citizenship. A federal judge blocked him. And now we're headed for a protracted legal battle that will probably end up at the Supreme Court. In the meantime, Trump's agenda is stalled. His base is frustrated. And Democrats are celebrating another court victory against Trump overreach. This is a disaster for Trump. And it's a preview of how his entire second term might go if he keeps trying to govern by unconstitutional executive order. Let's break down exactly what happened and why this matters so much. All right, so let's dig into the details of this birthright citizenship fight because it reveals everything about Trump's approach to governance and why he keeps running into legal walls. This isn't just about immigration policy. This is about constitutional limits on presidential power. And it's about Trump's fundamental misunderstanding of how the American legal system works. So let's break down the 14th Amendment, Trump's executive order, and why this court ruling was inevitable. First, the constitutional background. The 14th Amendment was ratified in 1868, right after the Civil War. Its primary purpose was to grant citizenship to formerly enslaved people and their descendants. The framers of the 14th Amendment wanted to make absolutely clear that citizenship couldn't be denied based on race or previous condition of servitude. So they wrote the Citizenship Clause, which says all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens. That language is broad. It's inclusive. And it's been interpreted for over 150 years to mean that if you're born on U.S. soil, you're a U.S. citizen, period. There are only very narrow exceptions, like children of foreign diplomats who aren't fully subject to U.S. jurisdiction. But for everyone else, birthplace determines citizenship. This principle is called jus soli, which is Latin for right of the soil. And it's actually relatively unusual globally. Many countries use jus sanguinis, right of blood, where citizenship is based on parentage rather than birthplace. But the U.S. has always used jus soli because of our history as a nation of immigrants and because of the 14th Amendment's mandate. And changing that fundamental principle isn't something a president can do with an executive order. You would need a constitutional amendment. And constitutional amendments require 2/3 of both houses of Congress and ratification by 3/4 of the states. That's an incredibly high bar. It's basically impossible in our current polarized political environment. So Trump tried an end run. He tried to reinterpret the 14th Amendment through executive action. Trump's executive order, which he signed early in his second term, attempted to deny citizenship to children born in the U.S. if neither parent is a U.S. citizen or lawful permanent resident. The order claimed that children of undocumented immigrants aren't subject to the jurisdiction of the United States in the way the 14th Amendment requires. That's a novel legal theory. It's been floated by some conservative legal scholars, but it's never been accepted by courts. The standard interpretation is that subject to the jurisdiction thereof simply means subject to U.S. laws. And everyone in the United States, including undocumented immigrants, is subject to U.S. laws. They can be arrested, they can be prosecuted, they pay taxes, they're under U.S. jurisdiction. So their children born on U.S. soil are automatically citizens under the 14th Amendment. But Trump thought he could change that interpretation unilaterally. He thought his executive order could override constitutional text in 150 years of settled law. And that's where he ran into trouble, because the ACLU and other civil rights organizations immediately filed lawsuits challenging the order. They argued correctly that the president doesn't have the power to rewrite the Constitution, that birthright citizenship is a constitutional right that can't be taken away by executive action. And they asked federal courts to block the order while the legal challenges played out. And that's exactly what happened. The New Hampshire federal judge looked at Trump's executive order and the constitutional text and concluded that the order is almost certainly unconstitutional. The judge found that the plaintiffs were likely to succeed on the merits of their case, that there would be irreparable harm to families if the order were allowed to go into effect, and that the public interest favored blocking the order. So the judge issued a preliminary injunction. And critically, the judge certified a nationwide class action. That means the injunction doesn't just apply to the specific plaintiffs in the case, it applies to everyone across the country who would be affected by Trump's order. That's why this is a nationwide block. Trump can't implement his policy in New Hampshire. He can't implement it in Texas. He can't implement it anywhere. The entire order is frozen. Now, Trump is appealing. He's going to take this to the Supreme Court and argue that the lower court judge got it wrong. And there's a chance the Supreme Court could side with Trump. The conservative supermajority has been willing to overturn precedent on other issues like abortion rights. Maybe they'd be willing to overturn birthright citizenship too. But this would be a much more radical step, because birthright citizenship isn't based on judicial interpretation that can evolve over time. It's based on explicit constitutional text. The 14th Amendment is clear. And for the Supreme Court to side with Trump, they would have to essentially rewrite the Constitution. They would have to say that subject to the jurisdiction thereof means something completely different than what it's meant for 150 years. And that's a huge ask, even for conservative justices. And there's also the practical problem. If Trump's order were upheld, it would create chaos. There are millions of US-born children who have at least one undocumented parent. Under Trump's order, those children would suddenly lose their citizenship. They would become stateless. They couldn't get passports. They couldn't access government benefits. They could potentially be deported to countries they've never been to and whose languages they don't speak. That's a humanitarian disaster. And it's also an administrative nightmare. How do you even implement such a policy? Do hospitals have to check parents' immigration status before issuing birth certificates? Do schools have to verify citizenship status for every student? The practical implications are staggering, and courts are generally reluctant to uphold policies that would create such massive disruption. There's also the international law angle. The United States has signed treaties recognizing the right to nationality and prohibiting statelessness. If Trump's order were implemented, it would put the U.S. in violation of those treaties. It would make children born on U.S. soil stateless, which is prohibited under international law. So Trump's policy doesn't just violate the U.S. Constitution, it violates international legal obligations. And that gives courts another reason to block it. Now let's talk about why Trump keeps doing this. Why does he keep signing executive orders that are obviously unconstitutional and that are going to get blocked by courts? There are a few reasons. First, it fires up his base. Trump supporters love it when he takes aggressive action on immigration. They don't care if courts block the orders later. They just want to see Trump fighting. So every time Trump signs one of these orders, even if it gets struck down, he gets credit from his base for trying. Second, Trump genuinely doesn't seem to understand constitutional limits on presidential power. He thinks being president means he can do whatever he wants. He views courts as obstacles to be overcome rather than co-equal branches of government enforcing constitutional boundaries. And third, Trump is setting up a narrative for when his policies fail. He can blame activist judges and the deep state rather than admitting his policies were illegal. But this strategy has costs. Every time Trump loses in court, it reinforces the perception that he doesn't know what he's doing, that he's signing orders without proper legal review, that his administration is chaotic and incompetent. And that perception matters politically, because voters want a president who can actually accomplish things, not a president who's constantly fighting losing legal battles. And Trump's base might not care about court losses, but independent voters do. They see Trump getting blocked by courts and they wonder if he's the right person to lead the country. There's also the resource drain. Every one of these legal battles costs money and time. Justice Department lawyers have to defend Trump's orders in court. They have to write briefs, attend hearings, argue appeals, and they keep losing. That's demoralizing for career DOJ attorneys. It makes it harder to recruit talented lawyers to work for the administration, and it diverts resources away from other priorities. Trump could be using his political capital to pass legislation through Congress. Instead, he's burning it on executive orders that keep getting struck down. So yeah, the birthright citizenship ruling is a big deal. It's a major blow to Trump's immigration agenda. It shows that courts are willing to stand up to Trump even in his second term. And it previews more legal defeats to come if Trump keeps trying to govern by unconstitutional executive order. This is not how Trump wanted his second term to start, but it's the reality he's created for himself. Okay, so let's break down why this birthright citizenship ruling matters so much politically and what it means for Trump's ability to govern. Because this isn't just one court case. This is part of a pattern of Trump losing in court over and over again. And that pattern is undermining his entire presidency. So let's go through the implications point by point. First point, this shows Trump can't deliver on his core campaign promises. Ending birthright citizenship was a major campaign pledge. Trump talked about it constantly. He said he would do it on day one through executive order. And he tried. He signed the order, but it got blocked immediately. So now what? Trump promised his supporters he would end birthright citizenship. He can't, at least not through executive action. And probably not at all, because it would require a constitutional amendment, which is politically impossible. So his supporters are left with broken promises. And that erodes the trust and enthusiasm that Trump needs to maintain his political power. Second point, this establishes a pattern of judicial resistance. This isn't the first Trump executive order to get blocked. It's not even close. Just Security is tracking over 30 lawsuits challenging Trump's executive orders. And courts are issuing injunctions left and right, orders on union rights, blocked, orders on administrative changes, blocked, orders on immigration enforcement, blocked. Trump is losing more legal battles than he's winning, and that establishes a pattern. It tells other judges that Trump's orders are often legally flawed and worth scrutinizing carefully. It creates momentum for judicial resistance. And that makes it even harder for Trump to accomplish anything through executive action going forward. Third point, this undermines Trump's strongman image. Trump's entire brand is built on strength and winning. He's the guy who gets things done, who breaks through obstacles, who doesn't take no for an answer. But when federal judges keep blocking his orders, that image falls apart. Trump looks weak. He looks like he doesn't have control. He looks like he's constantly being thwarted by the system he promised to dominate. And that's politically damaging, because Trump's appeal is largely based on the perception of strength. If that perception erodes, his political power erodes with it. Fourth point, this energizes Democratic opposition. Every time Trump loses in court, Democrats celebrate. They point to the ruling as proof that Trump is lawless and unconstitutional. They use it in fundraising emails. They use it in campaign speeches. They use it to motivate their base. And judicial victories against Trump are some of the most effective tools Democrats have, because they're not political attacks. They're neutral judges applying the law and finding that Trump violated it. That's much more credible than partisan criticism. So Trump's court losses are actively helping Democrats build their case against him. Fifth point, this drains political capital and momentum. Trump came into his second term wanting to focus on his agenda, tax cuts, deregulation, foreign policy wins. But instead, he's spending enormous amounts of time and energy fighting legal battles over executive orders that keep getting struck down. That's a waste of political capital. Every day Trump is talking about court losses is a day he's not talking about accomplishments. Every news cycle dominated by judicial defeats is a news cycle where Trump looks ineffective. And that momentum drain matters, because presidents have limited time to accomplish their goals, and Trump is squandering that time on losing legal battles. Sixth point, this creates divisions within the Republican Party. Some Republicans are quietly relieved when Trump's more extreme executive orders get blocked. They don't want to have to defend birthright citizenship ending. They don't want to have to explain why children born on U.S. soil shouldn't be citizens. So when courts block these orders, moderate Republicans breathe a sigh of relief. But MAGA Republicans are furious. They blame activist judges. They want Trump to ignore court orders or impeach judges or pack the courts. And that tension between moderate Republicans who respect rule of law and MAGA Republicans who want Trump to break through any constraint, that tension is tearing the party apart. And a divided party is a weaker party heading into midterms. Seventh point, this sets up a Supreme Court showdown that Trump might lose. Trump is appealing this birthright citizenship ruling to the Supreme Court, and he's betting that the conservative supermajority will side with him. But that's not guaranteed. Yes, the court has 6 conservative justices, but birthright citizenship is so clearly established in constitutional text that even conservative justices might not be willing to overturn it. And if Trump loses at the Supreme Court, that's devastating. That's the highest court in the land saying Trump's policy is unconstitutional. There's no appeal from that. It's final. And it would be a massive humiliation for Trump. He would have promised to end birthright citizenship, tried to do it, gotten blocked by lower courts, appealed to the Supreme Court, and lost there too. That's a complete failure on one of his signature campaign promises. So what's Trump's path forward? Honestly, he doesn't have a great one. He can keep signing executive orders and hoping some of them stick. But based on the current pattern, most of them are going to get challenged and many are going to get blocked. Or he could try to work with Congress to pass actual legislation. But that requires compromise and coalition building, which Trump is terrible at. Or he could focus on areas where he has clearer legal authority and less chance of getting blocked. But that would mean abandoning some of his most controversial campaign promises. None of these options are appealing to Trump, so he'll probably just keep doing what he's doing. Signing controversial executive orders, getting blocked by courts, attacking judges, appealing to the Supreme Court, and hoping eventually he gets a win. But that's not a strategy for successful governance. That's a strategy for creating chaos and headlines while accomplishing very little. And voters are going to notice, they're going to see that Trump is all talk and no action on his biggest promises, that courts keep stopping him, that he can't actually deliver. And that's going to hurt Republicans in 2026, because voters want results, not excuses. They want a president who can navigate the legal system and accomplish goals, not a president who's constantly losing legal battles and blaming judges. The bottom line is this: the birthright citizenship injunction is a huge defeat for Trump. It blocks one of his signature campaign promises. It establishes that courts are willing to stand up to him, and it previews more legal defeats to come. Trump's strategy of governing by executive order isn't working. Courts keep blocking his orders as unconstitutional. And every time that happens, Trump looks weaker and his agenda stalls. If Trump doesn't change his approach, if he keeps signing legally dubious executive orders, he's going to spend his entire second term fighting losing legal battles. And at the end of 4 years, he'll have accomplished very little. His supporters will be disappointed, his opponents will be emboldened, and Republicans will pay the price in elections. This birthright citizenship fight is just the beginning. Watch how it plays out at the Supreme Court, because if Trump loses there, it's game over for this policy. And it might be the beginning of the end for Trump's entire second term agenda.